And welcome back, Fourth and Long fans. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another off-season supporter series chat. And as I told you previously, I'm trying to find state league supporters, and today I have found a fantastic one. We are going to go to Victoria. We will tell the club here in just the littlest bit, but let's introduce him. We have Gerry joining us from Victoria. Thank you for joining us today.
Welcome, Donnie. Glad to be with you.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for hopping on the podcast. Now, before we get into the footy talk, which we are all here for, I kind of like finding out just the littlest bit about the person that I'm chatting with outside of footy. So, if you want just a real quick bio of who you are outside of the game of football.
I'm 65 years old next month. Um, from the country originally. Moved to the city when I finished my studies at the local university. Lived in Melbourne, Perth, Darwin, back to Melbourne. Then I retired 10 years ago, and I spend my time between Melbourne and my hometown, which is about 3 hours away from Melbourne in the southwest coast.
Fantastic.
And on I fill up most of my days as the historian for my local VFL club that we're going to talk about.
That is fantastic. That is great. I love that. This is going to be good. So before we go into it, we're gonna stay on just you a little bit before we start talking about your club. I gotta
Yep.
ask this again, as an American who caught on to the sport a little bit late and being from Victoria, I must ask this. What is your favorite thing about the sport of footy?
The favourite thing, well, I guess the comradeship, the friendships you make. Like I played football here in my hometown for oh well till I was 20, 22, and played in fortunate enough to play in a number of premiership sides, and the guys that I played in those premiership sides with many years ago, we're still friends, and we have occasional reunions, and it's like it's like we've never moved away. You just hit it off. It's quite amazing, even though you haven't seen these people for 20, 30, 40 years. You've still got that bond because you played together and played in premiership sides together. So I think it's the friendships you form for life, and the comradeship that exists within footy. It's just a fabulous game, and everything that goes with it, I love.
Fantastic. And the crazy part about it is I may not have the years that you have, but I completely agree. There's people who I've played with for years up here that there's that unmistakable bond that you have that you're like, I'm I have this memory with you that's never going to go away. So there's always kind of that mateship. So it's really, really cool. So 100% agree with you on this one. So I want to go back a little bit. I want you to go into the recesses of your memory a little bit. Can you remember your earliest footy memory?
Yeah, it was probably 1966. I was 8 years old, and for my birthday, my father took me to Melbourne on an aeroplane. So it's the first time I'd ever been on a plane. And we stayed with my uncle and cousins in Melbourne. And they were mad Fitzroy supporters. And my dad grew up in Port Melbourne and followed South Melbourne. So we went to the old Brunswick Street Oval in Fitzroy, and watched South Melbourne and Fitzroy play. And that was the first game of football I can ever recall. And I still remember sitting in the old grandstand at Fitzroy, which is still there, and just been totally, enthralled with the whole game and the crowd and the noise. Because I've probably been to football games here in my hometown, but they were nothing like this,
Mhm.
and I don't recall them. But that has stuck in my memory forever. And so that's going back a long way.
That is fantastic. And the crazy part about it, just thinking about it, is the fact that Fitzroy is now merged and part of the Brisbane Lions, and that South Melbourne is now the Sydney Swans up in Sydney. So it's kind of crazy. And people that listen to it, I am a huge Sydney Swans supporter, and that's one of the things I love about the Swans is that they have that South Melbourne still connection. Took a little bit to kind of reestablish it, but that's
Yeah,
crazy that you have that memory of that the old Fitzroy versus South Melbourne. That is fantastic. So
yeah.
a little bit, we'll jump off of AFL. Here we go. Here's your opportunity. You said you're a historian. What is the VFL club that we are going to be discussing, and how is it that you came to support them?
Well, the club we're talking about is Williamstown, and I only came to support them when I moved to the suburb. When I returned from Darwin to Melbourne, I lived on the other side of town for a few years, and just saved money to travel overseas. And when I came back from one of these trips, I thought, no, we were staying with my wife's parents at the time, and I thought, no, we've got to move out. We've got to get our own place. So I used to live in Port Melbourne before I moved to Perth. So I was going to make inquiries about moving back there because I quite liked the area. But the prices had, you know, gone through the roof, so to speak. So my sister suggested to me to go and have a look in Williamstown. So we went over there and found half a house that was up for rent, and that was 1990, and we've been there ever since. Not in the same place, but
Mhm.
in that suburb. I've never left, and because of my love for football, I graduated towards going down and watching Williamstown, and then met a few guys at the pub who followed Williamstown, and they got me involved. And we've got a coterie group there, and I joined that, and well, yeah, been involved ever since. So yeah, 30 years I've been involved with Williamstown now.
Fantastic and a great story too. It's not something. It's always interesting how everybody kind of gets their club or kind of acquires their love for their club. So for most people, it's a family thing. Sometimes it comes through
Yes.
the father or the mother or the grandma. I've even heard the grandmother was the first one. So some of
Yeah.
these stories are fantastic. So as a Williamstown supporter, is there anybody else in your family that are Williamstown supporters, or do they support other clubs in the VFL? And if so, how's the banter when your teams play?
No, not really. My dad was uh, wasn't born in Port Melbourne, but spent most of his life there, and he followed the borough and South Melbourne, and that's how I got to go that game at Fitzroy in 1966. Um, but yeah, I did follow South Melbourne because of my dad and because they won that game. I remember my dad and my uncle saying to me, "Who are you going to barrack for?" And I said, "Whoever wins the game, I'll barrack for them." South Melbourne won, so that's how I came to support South Melbourne. But then when they moved to Sydney in that tumultuous time of the early 80s,
Mhm,
that was one of the reasons I moved to Perth because football, I didn't really like Melbourne and Melbourne, the city,
mhm,
because I'm a country boy. And I thought, well, footy was the only thing that kept me in Melbourne, really. So once South Melbourne were gone, I thought, well, I'll pack up and move to Perth. That's about as far away as I can get. And off I went, and I refused to watch them on TV. Wouldn't read anything about them in the papers. And every week they lost, I was happy.
oh,
I
the
was
vengeful
very,
fan.
very filthy on the whole thing, as a lot of other people were,
Mhm.
and still are.
And I've heard of all of that too, and I 100% respect that too, because it's never easy to have your club relocate, especially in that situation. So I had absolutely no issue there. So as you said earlier, you were the Williams historian for Williamstown. So I'm interested because you're going to have a wealth of knowledge on this. Can you give me just a little bit of history on Williamstown? As you kind of said, this is an old club in the VFL, so I'm fascinated by some of the stories you may have.
Yeah, well, the club has always believed it was formed in 1864, and if you ever look at our website or any of the branding attached to Williamstown, you'll keep seeing the year 1864 all the time. So it wasn't until I became a historian that I started doing a lot of research.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you're are you aware of Trove, our National Library facility where you can look at digitised newspapers?
I unfortunately no, but this sounds fascinating.
Okay, so yeah, Trove's this wonderful uh, thing that's run by the National Library of Australia, and they've digitised all the old newspapers, not all of them, but a lot of them, and you can read them online and search and uh, you know, and I spend hours, days on there going through. I'll get on there to look at one particular thing, and then you just stumble on all these other
Hmm.
things, and you go off on tangents, and it's an amazing resource. So I started researching the origins of the club, and I found 6 newspaper references to the fact that they were actually originated in 1860. Um, they were, as most of the early Australian rules football clubs were formed out of cricket clubs because the cricket clubs were enclosed. So they had fences. So because this game of Australian rules was becoming so popular, the cricket clubs realised, well, during winter when we're not using our ground, we can get a football club and put it there and charge admittance,
Hmm.
get money. So that's how most of the early football clubs were formed, out of cricket clubs. And that's what happened with Williamstown. There was a cricket club called the Williamstown Alliance Cricket Club, and they formed the Williamstown Football Club in May 1860. And it all started from there. And I've been pushing this idea that really
Hmm.
Williamstown's formed in 1860, and we're the third oldest club in Victoria, if not Australia. And the club should be really jumping on board with this instead of sticking with 1864, which makes us born the same year as Carl,
Hmm.
where in fact we're 4 years older.
Crazy to think that it just shows you that sometimes a little bit of research and a few newspaper articles can really throw you off. That's absolutely insane. So kind of going off that, how's been their success? I know again we had the VFA and the VFL kind of prior to the AFL's kind of performance, and then the changing of that. So just really quick, can you how's been their success rate? Have they won premierships? Kind of win about just a little history on that.
Yeah, sure, mate. We've won 16 premierships, um, 14 of those in what we used to call First Division VFA,
Hmm.
and 2 in Second Division VFA. I don't know if you're aware, but we had a promotion relegation system in the VFA from the early 1960s until
Hmm.
1988, I think. And the the premier team in the Second Division went up to First Division,
Yep.
and the wooden spooner in First Division dropped down. So there was two different divisions, and we've won, as I said, 14 of our premierships in First Division and 2 in Second Division. And in the 1950s, we had an amazing run of success where we won the premiership in 1954, 1955, 1956. I'll come back to what happened in 1957. And we won it in 58 and 59. In 1957, we won every game, undefeated, sitting on top of the ladder. Lost the first final by less than a goal, and that would have been the second semi-final. We played the preliminary final and got beaten by about 10 goals, and that was it. We're out.
Oh boy.
So, like, we're unbackable favourites for the 57 premiership,
Hmm.
and went out in straight sets in the finals. And so did our seconds. Hadn't lost a game all year, lost both finals and went out. So 1957 was a pretty tragic year, but we had an amazing run in 1950.
It's insane, but it just shows you even in present day footy, like that there is a difference between the home and away and then the finals. There's something different. It's this weird, you can't put your finger on it, but there's this weird change when it comes to final. The footy changes, and
Yeah.
it's fantastic. I think it makes the footy even better come finals time because
Oh,
there's
yeah.
there's an extra intensity. There's an extra little bit of get in you when it comes to getting after the footy. So it just shows you that if you rest on your laurels or you don't have your right day, anything can happen in the finals. So
Oh yeah,
it just
complacency
kind of
creeps
shows you.
in, and
Uh-huh.
probably going through the season undefeated, and all the press wrapping them up and saying, "Oh, we'll just give them the premiership now. No one's going to beat them."
Mm-hmm.
And look what happens. But anyway,
See,
that's history, and we
awesome.
move on. But we've won a premiership in every decade except the 1910s. So we won one in 1907, 1921, 1939 when we came from last in 38 to win the flag in 39, 45, 49, and then that fabulous run in the 50s.
50s, yeah.
And then again in 69, 76, 86, 90, 2003, and 2015.
Impressive, and you got to say it's impressive on almost the consistency, the ability to always find a way to win a premiership in each decade. That's fantastic. So again, here's the historian, and things have changed again. The VFA, VFL, all of the changes. What would you say is the biggest rival for Williamstown? Maybe even in the present day VFL, or maybe prior years.
Oh, Port Melbourne, without a doubt. The two Bayside suburbs who sort of face each other have been rivals since the 1880s. And I don't think that, well, Collingwood and Carlton probably comes close, but I
Mm-hmm.
think Williamstown and Port Melbourne have the oldest rivalry in Victoria. Other states like South Fremantle and East Fremantle have got it. Port Adelaide, just about every other side have it in South Australia. But here in
Mm-hmm.
Victoria would be um, Port Melbourne and Williamstown easily. Fierce
And
rivals. The things that went on in the 1950s, because they played in the grand final most of those years in the 50s, and Williamstown beat Port every time. And there was it got so bad at one stage, there was a guy that played for Williamstown called Gerry Callahan,
mm-hmm.
who was the captain coach. Oh, no, he was captain until 58 when he became captain coach. He was called the Monster. He was a fearsome fella. No teeth, crew cut, bent nose, as rough as a cat's head. And it got so bad that they were playing Port Melbourne one day, and Port Melbourne put a pig, like a dead pig,
Mm-hmm.
in the race. And each Port player, and they wrote the Monster on the pig, and each Port player, as he ran out, had to stick a knife in
Oh boy. Wow.
That's how fierce the rivalry was between these two clubs. It was really something else.
That is crazy. I mean, and I thought the story of the pig on the ground for Plugger Lockett was nuts. Let alone a dead pig that had to be stabbed. That
Yeah,
is
with
mental.
Gerry's name on it.
Oh boy, that is fantastic. All right, so we'll reel in such great history. I truly appreciate it. I'm definitely gonna have to look some more up on Williamstown. That's fantastic. So we'll go back to you a little bit. As you said,
Yep.
you kind of pick up Williamstown a little bit later than some. Can you remember the first Williamstown item that you were given or bought?
Um, I probably bought some merchandise when I started going down to watch them. Yeah, probably a scarf or a beanie or something like that, I'd imagine. And I was given a jumper. This is just a little aside, but whenever famous people come into your town or whatever, you'd like to get them photographed with your team's jumper.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happened I had a nice old Californian bungalow in Williamstown, and a film company wanted to use it to make this movie about Marilyn Monroe. And starring in this film was that lady that was in Cheers that died recently. I can't think of her name. Did you ever watch Cheers?
Not unfortunately, it might have been a little bit early for me,
Uh,
unfortunately.
Kirstie Alley.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Kirstie Alley. So she was starring in this film, and I went, So I was given the jumper by the club to go around and, if she was there and willing, to put her on and get a photograph of her in the Williamstown jumper.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, I went around to the house one day when they started filming. There she was standing in my front yard, but I couldn't work up the courage to go
Oh
and talk
boy.
to her. Yeah, which I've regretted ever since, because apparently she was quite a friendly person, and yeah, she probably would have been receptive to that idea if, as long as it didn't mess up her hair or her clothes or something. She probably would have been receptive to that idea. So yeah, I was given the jumper to do that, which I've still got.
That's fantastic, and I love hearing those stories, and I've seen it all the time on all the social medias. Like an NFL star is in, and they're in Melbourne, Collingwood, Carlton,
Yeah,
or Hawthorn. They always find a way to, hey,
yeah,
here's our jumper. Let's do a jumper exchange. So
yeah,
it's always kind of fascinating to see that kind of the cheeky little, hey, you have probably no idea what this sport is, but here's our jumper, why don't you become a supporter? So it's always
yeah.
kind of, I always kind of chuckle a little bit when I see that, because it's a PR move, just the littlest bit. So alrighty, so as you kind of said, you came into Williamstown when you moved there, and I'm one of those, I believe that fandom is this unique thing that I've always fascinated with, because nobody fans the same, nobody supports the same, because everybody kind of handles things differently. So I'm always fascinated when I talk with fans. I want to hear them describe their fandom for me. Are you one of those people that Williamstown is your club, you have to go to the games all the time, or can you take a step back and kind of separate yourself, unlike the diehards as some would consider?
Oh, I'm pretty passionate about Williamstown, and I never miss a home game, unless there was something extraordinary happened. I'd never miss a home game. Um, Away games sometimes are a bit problematic. Now that we've got interstate clubs in the competition, two from Queensland, and the second Queensland club dropped out. We did have two, and then we've got the Queensland and New South Wales AFL clubs are in the competition now, and we may end up with
Mhm.
a Tasmanian one. We did have a Tasmanian club previously, but they may come back in as a prelude to joining the AFL. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, most of the away games I tend to go to, especially the ones that are a bit closer to home. Port Melbourne's always can't miss that one. It's
Mm.
a very interesting ground to go to. It's small and pretty tight, and the Port fans are pretty loud. So yeah, that gets interesting. That's a game you don't want to miss. Um, but yeah, we'll see. Having dropped off the AFL after what happened with South Melbourne and then Fitzroy, um, Williamstown's my number one interest in football. I still watch the AFL on TV,
Mhm.
still enjoy it. Love the athleticism of the game. But for me, I don't have the passion to follow a club in the AFL anymore.
Mhm.
So yeah, Williamstown's my team, and yeah, love it dearly.
Fantastic. Absolutely love that. And again, it's so cool to find those fans that have that deep connection with their club, especially the stateside like this, because it, again, as we were kind of saying off mic before, it's, you have the conglomerate of the AFL that kind of, it sucks up fans because it's very easy, a little bit easier to access. So this for me is fun, because I'm finding clubs that I'm like, there's this really cool rich history that they have that I'm very interested to look into. So thank
Mm.
you so much for that. So uh, as we said, as we kind of established there, again, you got into it late. Now that you're there, can you remember the first Williamstown game that you ever attended live at the ground?
Yeah, it was the first round of 1988. Um, it was Williamstown versus Port Melbourne in the opening game of the year, and I'd just come back from Darwin, so I hadn't seen footy in Melbourne for a number of years. I just the odd game, maybe if I happened to be back in Melbourne on holidays, but I hadn't been regularly going to games since 1982. Um, so yeah, it was. Yeah, I remember it vividly. It was Williamstown versus Port at Port, round one, 1988, and Williamstown won.
Fantastic. And the best part is you got to see a win. That's awesome. So, all right.
Yeah.
Now, as a club historian, you have a much, much bigger realm in this next question. So I'm fascinated on this. Is I love finding out. It's kind of like choosing your favorite child if you have multiple children as a parent. So I know this isn't always easy. Do you have a favorite player of the past that donned the Williamstown jersey? And do you have a favorite player currently that dons the Guernsey?
Oh, that's a tough question because there's been a lot of great players come through Williamstown. Probably probably the most famous and the most loved in my time following Williamstown would be a bloke called Barry Round, who sadly passed away just before Christmas. And you
Hmm.
following the Swans would know who I'm talking about.
Hmm.
And he came to Williamstown from Sydney in 1986, and at the age of 36, and played in his first premiership that year, and then went on to win the Liston Medal, which is the competition's best and fairest award, the following year, and then led us to two more grand finals, the ones that Coburg beat us in '88 and '89, and then led us as captain coach. He then led us to the premiership in 1990, where we had the most amazing last quarter comeback you'll ever see in your life. It's on YouTube. Have a look at it one day. Williamstown versus Springvale, 1990.
I will
That
definitely
last,
take a look. I'm
that
starting.
last,
I'm. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say that last quarter is the most amazing 30 minutes of football you'll ever see.
All right, I'm starting a list because my last question, and most likely that's probably going to be your answer for that. My last question, I'm kind of making a list of some of the best games that so many people have, so I can kind of check them out.
Yep.
So it'll be on my list for sure. So, alrighty, I'm always I love this question now because I've absolutely love just the reactions that I see on the Zoom link here because there's a glow, there's a twinkle in their eyes when they do this. So I love asking this question. Most memorable moment so far as a Williamstown supporter.
Oh, the 1990 grand final, without a doubt. Without a doubt. To come back from so far down and hit the front with less than a minute to go and go on to win by 2 points was just the most amazing game of football I've ever seen.
That
Incredible.
is that is fantastic. And again, I love, like I said, the twinkle in their eye because you can tell that when they remember it so vividly. Those are the ones you can shut your eyes and you know
Oh,
exactly what they're going through. They know exactly what it is. So I absolutely love that. So we've talked a lot about the past, previous episodes. So we're going to kind of go to a little bit more of the present. And we're in the off season. We're getting closer and closer to the VFL season. So we'll backtrack just the littlest bit. Unfortunately, I did my research because I wanted to be sure I didn't ask a question insensitively. Last season, unfortunately for Williamstown, was not exactly one to write home about. So, really quickly, can just a little bit of your thoughts, unfortunately, with Williamstown finishing, as I see, unfortunately, in 20th position out of 20. Thankfully, no wooden spoon and only
no.
12 points on the season in 18 games.
Yeah, by any measure, it was a disaster. And for a club that's been so successful and a perennial finalist for years and years and years, it was a very bitter season. To win 3 games was just terrible. But there were um, circumstances that led to it. As you know, we'd come off no football at all in 2020,
Mhm.
half a season in 2021. And then in the lead up to 2022, the AFL, in its wisdom, decided to halve the salary cap. Um, the reasoning being, I think, was that because we'd been through all these years of no footy or half a season of footy, clubs might be struggling financially to pay players.
Mhm.
So they halved the salary cap and all our good players left because they could earn much more money playing suburban or country footy,
Mhm.
doing half the work and half the training. And yeah, we were just decimated. So we just played a lot of kids who may be better for the experience, perhaps. But yeah, the season was a disaster. And We never see it again. But the two of the three sides we beat both made the finals. So two of the victories were, meritorious,
Mm-hmm.
beating two teams that made the finals. So that was something to take out of the year, a positive, if you like.
Yeah, gives you something to put your hat on a little bit. So
Oh yeah,
and it's always fascinating. And I want to ask this before we move on. As I remember talking with my Frankston supporter in Port Melbourne, and I meant to ask this, and especially with your kind of being mostly a VFL supporter, you don't watch the AFL when it comes to a club support. You keep an eye on
no.
it. How frustrating is it as a VFL supporter and as a Williamstown supporter to kind of see the fact that, as you said, the four teams from up north with the two Sydney teams and the two Queensland teams that are AFL based are playing in the VFL now. So it makes your job, it makes the VFL's unattached clubs, Williamstown, Coburgs, the Frankstons, their job's a little bit harder because there are still AFLers or AFL
Mm.
contracted players that are playing for Sydney, Brisbane, Gold Coast, and all in GWS that are now in your VFL. So there's much less of an opportunity to make finals.
Yeah, it makes it harder. Our blokes work, and as do the Port and Frankston and Coburg and Sandringham blokes, and we're playing against blokes that are professional footballers, training 5 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
whereas our blokes are on the tools. It makes it very hard, and particularly going back to the COVID affected years, those guys were playing and training where our guys weren't. So
Mm-hmm.
our blokes have missed a year and a half of football, whereas the AFL clubs were hardly affected at all,
Mm-hmm.
apart from having to have interstate hubs and whatever. But they trained and they played, so their skills were kept up, and they could still do all this gym work and strength work.
Mm-hmm.
So our blokes were really left a year and a half behind. But having said that, when you do beat them, it gives you a hell of a lot of satisfaction.
It makes you smile a little bit too. It gives you something to hang your hat on a little bit. So
Oh well, sometimes you're playing against sides that contain top
mm-hmm.
line AFL players coming back from suspension or injury,
Mm-hmm.
or they've been demoted for disciplinary reasons or lack of form or whatever.
Or even a
So you,
top tier 18-year-old that's a top 10 pick that needs to get their form back before they go to the AFL. So you get a little bit of everything,
oh
uh,
yeah,
for
yeah. We've
sure.
had some really good players playing against us,
Mm-hmm.
and to knock off those sides is gives you a lot of satisfaction, a lot of
Makes you
pride, a
chuckle,
lot of enjoyment.
a little bit for sure.
Oh, exactly.
All
Especially
right.
when, yeah. Anyway, move on.
And to the next question I asked is, as I said, I kind of told you it's the conglomerate of the AFL. So a lot of the off season, I'm used to the draft, the sign in trade period, and I know
Mm,
for the VFL, Sandful and Waffle, it's not that. I mean, it is completely different. It is pretty much pillage and find what you can and try to maintain what you already have because again, as you said, many of these they're tradies, they do stuff, they work
yeah.
besides the footy that they play. So do you keep an eye on Williamstown's off season to see who's in, who's out, who's coming in, who may move on? And if so, kind of what are your thoughts? Has Williamstown done anything over this off season, or are you one of those you kind of catch up once we get a little bit closer to the season?
Oh, no, I keep a very close eye on it. We get a lot of news on our website and social media platforms. So we've, not so much on the guys who have left.
Mm-hmm.
They barely get mentioned. But the new guys coming in, we get a lot of information about them. And the club has recruited really, really well this year. So we're going to have a completely different side, which is going to be a lot more competitive. I think a lot of that's down to our major sponsor, DSV, if I can give them a plug, because they're employing quite a few of these players. And that's what is allowing us, in many cases, to get them across the line because
Mm-hmm.
we can offer them employment. Because when the salary cap was a lot higher, we were the only one, or the only standalone club, I believe, that was
Hmm.
paying the full salary cap. So we could attract players by just paying them.
Hmm.
But with the halving of the salary cap, and it's been increased a little bit now, you can't just throw money at
Hmm.
them. So other clubs had to use things like finding a sponsor who could offer employment, and that's the path we've gone down now, and it's proved very successful.
Fantastic. Like I said, I wish them nothing but success. Like I said, I'm gonna try to keep an eye on the VFL a lot, VFL and the VFLW a lot more this season because I think state signs need a little bit more support. And I'm fascinated to see these because I know there's quality players that are here that they just need that one opportunity. So I can't wait. So we jump to it, as you kind of said, you've
Yep,
got a little bit of a new team. You got some bring ins, some changes. Again, you've now had a full off season where you can actually train. You're not sitting in your house because of COVID lockdowns.
yep.
So what are your kind of thoughts going into this year? Do you think Williamstown jumps up the ladder? Do you think they're fighting for a final spot? Or do you just see some progression instead of 20th, you're jumping into that 15 to 13 range where maybe very soon you'll start seeing that opportunity to maybe slip into the finals?
Oh, my expectation is that we'll make the finals, and I'd be extremely bitterly disappointed if we didn't with
Hmm.
the work that's been done in the off season. Um, but every other club's trying to improve as well.
Hmm.
Um, so everybody goes up a notch, and so you don't know. Um, and with the AFL clubs too, their presence in the VFL can be problematic sometimes because they might have a big clean out
Hmm.
and get rid of a lot of senior players and start to rebuild, say like Hawthorn's done,
Hmm.
which then sort of weakens Box Hill to some extent, just as by way of an example. So
Hmm.
the, so some of those AFL clubs with a VFL side or even an Alliance side may not be as strong this year as they were last year.
Hmm.
And I'm sure Port Melbourne has. Well, I know that they've got a couple of big name recruits too, so they should do better.
Yeah.
Um, as for Coburg and Preston, well, you don't hear much about them in the recruiting side because they don't have the money or the profile to attract the players.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. Again, I'm fascinated to see how Box Hill handles it because again, the second year under Sam Mitchell in the AFL will be fascinating to see. Do they see progressions? And then again, how does and my other question that I have is the kind of the super team that I've been told a little bit of Southport because they were the only standalone club that made the finals that
Yep.
there and they were kind of by all intents and purposes, from what I kind of gathered, was they were kind of the super team of the Queensland footy players that were no longer part of the NEFL. The
Mm.
Southport joined, so some of the best NEFL players that were in Queensland found their way to Southport. So it'd be interesting to see how that kind of adjusts to for sure. So we're gonna have a little bit of fun now. Okay, you said
Yep.
you're the historian, but I'm gonna change your office for one day. Okay, we're gonna have a little bit of fun. I'm gonna install you as the list manager for one day at Williamstown FC. And I want you to go through the other VFL clubs and I want you to pick one player that you're going to snatch and you're going to put on Williamstown roster for next season. Who's that one player and why?
Ooh. Ooh. Let me think. Let me think. Um, from a Victorian club.
Sure. And Victorian, you can hey, if you want to take one from Sydney, Southport, Queen, all it is they had to play VFL last year.
Yeah, well, there's a young guy that plays in the forward line for Sydney. Can't remember his name, and I think he may have played a few senior games. He looks like he's Indigenous or an Islander or something. I can't think of his name, but the two times we played Sydney, he did really well, and he might have kicked 5 or 6 goals in the game we played up in Sydney against them. But I just can't think of his name. Oh, It's going to annoy me now.
And I think I know exactly who you're talking about. Was he a midfield forward, kind of rotated
Oh
between
no,
the back?
no, he'd be well over 200 centimeters. Oh, maybe not quite that big, but he's a fairly tall guy. I'm
Oh,
just
I think you're talking about Armati.
that sounds yes.
Yep. Joel
I think that
Armati
might be him.
is exactly who I think you're thinking of. Yeah,
Yes,
he's about yeah, he's up there. I can't remember centimeters wise. I think he's about 6'2", 6'3". Great jumping
yeah,
ability, great hands. He's one of those. He's kind of the backup rock slash third forward because when you have Buddy and Sam Reed both playing well,
yeah.
there was that because they had them and then the young kid out of WA that was kind of in and out of the side too. So yeah, I think you're thinking of Joel Armati.
I think that's him. Yeah, that name sounds familiar. And is he Indigenous or an Islander? Or,
Um, I know I'd have to look. I'm not sure if he is or
mm,
not. I know he is dark skinned. I'm not
yeah,
sure if he
yeah,
actually
that's him.
is. Right off the bat, this is absolutely scintillating,
Yeah, no,
scintillating
I'd love him in my
video.
forward line.
There's a picture of him.
Yeah, that looks like him.
So,
Yep,
yep,
yep.
yep. That's
No,
Joel Armati. So,
I'd take him in a heartbeat. Put him in our forward line.
yeah, he's got great hands.
Yeah,
Six
fabulous
six
player.
216, at least according to this. So I'd have
Is
to
he
do
6'6"?
that's what it says on here.
He would have been a ruckman back in the day.
Yeah, Bomarius Victoria. So he's a Vic boy.
Okay.
So
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know his background. But no, fabulous player.
oh yeah, he's one of those. Unfortunately, like I said, he had a few superstars ahead of him, but I'm hoping he gets an opportunity with the Swans for sure. He's got great sticky hands for sure. So
Yeah. Oh,
I'll so we'll transition to the next one, and I at least love this is that many people that listen to the podcast know I am a huge supporter of the women's game. I think the women's game is a growth opportunity for all footy clubs because women's youth footy has exploded since the AFLW has started. So I ask this of you since you are the club historian. Do you
yep.
keep an eye on the Williamstown women because you are one of the few um, unattached VFL clubs that has a women's side as well. So do you keep an eye on it? And if so, what were your thoughts, unfortunately, on kind of like the men? The women's side did not have the greatest season, shall we say, last year as well.
Yes, that's quite correct. They didn't have a good year. I think there was some underlying reasons for that. I won't go into on here, but there's been some changes. A new coach has been brought in who coached the Coburg women's side, which plays in a different competition.
Mhm.
He coached them to the grand final, which they lost by 1 or 2 points, I think. Um, so he's stepped up to VFL level now. And once again, I think they've recruited okay. They've brought back a girl who left, who was a very good player. She went to Collingwood for a year or two. She's come back.
Alicia Newman.
Very correct.
Yep,
Well,
she
you do
plays
know.
with this, and she plays for the Swans AFLW team.
Oh, was it Swans? I thought it was Collingwood. She
Well,
went
she
to. Oh,
she she started at Melbourne, then went to Collingwood, and then moved up to Sydney last year during the free agency period. So she's been with
okay.
three different clubs. But
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I I saw that she had signed with them. In fact, I had the pleasure of sitting down with her and having a chat for this particular podcast. Absolutely fantastic young lady, and I'm happy for her because she gets some. I think this is a good way of getting some more continuity to her footy because she kind of has some issues. Again, a young Swans team last year that the cohesion between midfield to forward sometimes kind of broke down a little bit. So having a good VFLW season next year, I think get her confidence up, maybe help her out when it comes to the AFLW season. So I can't wait to keep an eye on to see how she does.
Yeah, no, it's great to get her back. Um, the captain of the ladies' side, I think she's captain, Ruby Petrodi. She's a really good player and a terrific person. Um, yeah, no, I think they've recruited well, and from all the vibes I'm hearing, they should be greatly improved, which should be fantastic. Once again, I get down to to watch the home games when I can, uh, but they're all the games. They're broadcast like live stream.
Hmm.
So if I can't get to the game, I have a look at that. And myself and my wife are sponsoring one of the female players this year, as well as one of the male players. So we try to support it as much as we can.
Fantastic. And I love that. I truly appreciate that because unfortunately there aren't always as many people that are supportive of the women's game. So my next question, I originally was going to ask this, but I think you've kind of answered it. As you said, you were a South supporter, and then unfortunately South moved to Sydney, and you kind of said, I don't no more AFL. So I look at it like this.
Well, that's not 100% correct
Okay.
because when I, excuse me for butting in, but I just
No, you're good.
want to add this before I forget. When I moved back to Melbourne, I had a couple of mates who followed Fitzroy.
Hmm.
So I started to go and watch Fitzroy play, and then got involved with them just as a supporter and a season's ticket holder. So I virtually went through the whole thing again with Fitzroy in
The
1996.
merger. Yep. The
Well, the
merger.
merge over, takeover.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, so I've lost two sides. So
Oh boy.
um, yeah,
Twice burned.
yeah,
Oh, I'm
yeah, done it
sorry. I'm
twice.
so sorry for this. So normally I ask what's your AFL side, and if so, why? So
Yeah.
I think we've already kind of answered that. Um, I know, like I said, you've kind of been burned by the men's side. Is it kind of the same thing with AFLW? You keep an eye on it, but you don't have a side in AFLW?
Oh no, I don't support any side in the AFLW, but yeah, definitely watch it on TV. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, no, I enjoy watching it on TV. I think it's a pretty good standard and getting better. Um, and certainly you can't fault their endeavour.
Hmm.
The tackling is ferocious, and you know the skill level leaves a bit to be desired with some of the girls, and some of them are brilliant, like that girl Erin Phillips from
Hmm.
uh, well, Port Adelaide now, I think.
Hmm.
She's a gun.
Oh yeah, and some of the youngsters now keep an eye on it. I know Ellie McKenzie from the Richmond Tigers, absolutely elite. Both Pasparka sisters, both Maddie and Georgie, absolutely elite. I can't wait to see the growth of Montana Ham, who's up with Sydney. I think she's going to be an absolute gun. So I think it's
Mm,
in really good hands. I think a lot of these 18-year-old girls, the fact that they've had paths their entire lives, not just stop at 12 because Oz kick is the last they can
yeah,
do. I think
yeah.
is nothing but great. Like I said, I think I understand some of the detractors, but I think many of them they're looking at it now. I'm seeing that growth pattern each year. I can't wait for the next 5 years because it's only going to progress. I absolutely cannot wait to see this because these are some elite athletes. They just need some time to develop. I cannot wait.
Well, in the first couple of years of the AFLW, as you're probably aware,
Hmm.
there were girls who were brought in who'd never played the game.
Hmm.
So they brought them in from
Cross
netball,
coders. Yep.
soccer, and that would never happen at the elite level in the men's game.
Hmm.
So naturally, the skill level wasn't there. But now you're getting probably not right now, but next few years, as you said, you're going to have girls who have been brought up on the game from a,
Hmm.
a child.
4 or 5.
So
Yep.
they've been
Yep.
taught all the skills, and so they're going to be ready-made players who
Hmm.
are going to be fantastic.
Yep. Cannot wait. It's
Yeah,
gonna be so much fun to watch it. So we go from the so as I kind of previewed this a little bit. I'm fascinated to hear you this because we had our discussion a little bit off mic about how I had told you a little bit about the VFL side. So I'm fascinated to hear your answer on this. As we saw in 2020 and 2021, the AFL Grand Final found itself outside of Victorian soil for the first time with GABA and Optus Stadium Grand Finals. And it was very fascinating for me because I try to keep track of a lot of media because again, I do my AFL review shows. And I was fascinated that the many media outlets in Victoria were bringing up the topic of, should the AFL look to potentially make the grand final a traveling grand final? And I know 50-year contract, comment section, calm down a little bit. If we suspend that 50-year contract just the tiniest bit here, are you one of those that you believe the grand final should be at the MCG, or is there part of you that kind of goes, we're a national competition, should we start looking at maybe seeing the grand final become a traveling grand final, a lot like the Super Bowl over here in the States?
Frankly, I couldn't care less where it was played, mate.
I love
I'm
your
not a
honesty. I appreciate it.
I'm not an AFL sycophant, so I don't care where it's played. I mean, it makes sense to play it at the MCG purely from the fact you can get 100,000 people there,
Hmm.
whereas the SCG you might get 40,000 or
Hmm.
45,000. I think Optus in Perth can hold 60.
Hmm.
Adelaide Oval will probably be around the 40 mark as
I think
well.
it's 50, 54, 55
Oh, is it?
max.
Okay.
Yeah. The
Okay.
AFLW grand final a few years ago had it maxed out at 53
Oh,
or
that's
something.
yes,
So,
correct. Um, so purely from a an accountant's point of view, I can
mhm.
see why you'd want to play it at the MCG. But as you say, it's a national game. Spread it round. I don't care if it's played in Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, Tasmania, Darwin. I couldn't care less.
Mhm. I
Doesn't
appreciate the honesty on that one. I genuinely appreciate it. So I'm probably going to get the same answer for the next one, because I'm fascinated by this. Maybe it's because um, the AFL decided to steal Magic Round, which they have brilliantly called Gather Round
Oh
in
yeah.
South Australia this year, and I'm fascinated because I've bounced back and forth with this. I think it's a good idea to kind of help support the game and to grow the game, but I'm one of those 9 games AFL standard on some community grounds in South Australia. So I asked this: does this interest you at all? As you said, you're not an AFL sycophant, and would you at all consider going to something like this where you'd have the chance to see 9 games in one area?
No. No, I,
I love it. I absolutely love it.
no, I don't. Oh, look, I haven't examined the rationale behind it. I really don't care. Um, for me, I'd like it to be called the Barry Round
Mhm.
in honour of the great man. I don't
I
think that's going
love
to
it.
get up,
That is
but
great.
that's what I would like to see it called. But yeah, I don't understand the rationale behind doing it. But
Mhm.
um, smarter people than me make these decisions. So
I think they look at the NRL with Magic Round and they see how successful it is. But as I've kind of stated in a few of the podcasts, you got to look at the AFL is a little bit different, because with NRL, it is primarily New South Wales, Queensland. That's it.
yep,
Yes,
yep,
you've got the Melbourne Storm, which I mean is kind of the oddball when it comes to it. But really, that is it. The majority of
yeah,
the clubs are New South Wales and the Sydney area, and then in the Brisbane area when it comes to Queensland. So it's much easier for the fans to get to Brisbane or to Sydney for 9 games in one place. Where it's like, if you look at the AFL, you've got all of the states except except for the Northern Territories and Tassie. That's it. I mean,
yeah,
there's at least 2 clubs in all the other states. So you've got a
yep,
much bigger swath of Australia to try to bring people to. So it's a much kind of more diverse fan base, shall we say. So I'm interested to
yep,
see how the interstate fans kind of handle it. I think SA they're going to support it. They're football crazy, just like WA and Vic. So I think they'll support it. I'm just fascinated to see how many
mm,
Victorian fans go over, how many WA fans go over, how many New South Wales supporters, how many Queensland, because that'll be my thing, is to kind of gauge how that goes. I've heard good things. I've heard the hotels in Adelaide for that weekend are all sold out. So I'm hoping that that's a positive
okay,
sign. But
yeah,
that could be country SA people coming into
yeah.
town to be able to be closer to the Adelaide Oval for some of the games there. I'm not 100% sure, but I hope it's successful. I really do. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, well, I guess people might take it as an opportunity to have a holiday in Adelaide,
Hmm.
or spend a week in South Australia and combine it with a game of footy.
Or
I
two.
could see why people would want to go. As for the South Australian people themselves, as you touched on before, they have this. How would you say? I won't say inferiority complex, um, but they really have this deep hatred of Victorians, um, which goes back to football and cricket. And
Hmm.
uh, they'll go and watch Port Adelaide and the Crows. I don't know how many of them would go to watch two Victorian sides play.
Be interesting to see.
They might.
I kind of threw that up too. I'm like, I'm interested to see how the SA fans do they go to the games that don't have the SA teams. And I do kind of have to give the AFL a little bit of credit. They probably were talked to try to make it a showdown between Adelaide and Port Adelaide. And I said, you can't do that because
Mm,
you're taking the majority of the fans that want to see this and you're throwing them in one game. At least if you split
mm,
them and have them play two different teams, you at least get you're
yeah,
guaranteed two crowds for two games at least. So I at
yeah,
least appreciate that they didn't go with the kind of obvious, as some people might say, is doing a showdown there, which I
yeah.
think that's a really good idea. So
Mm,
we will jump off that. And
okay.
as I've told a few people, I have not been to Australia. It is on my bucket list. I want to get there because I want to see footy in its element. Footy over here is great, but it doesn't have the same vibe because it's not as professional. It is amateurs basically. And so I want to see games over there. So I'm doing a little bit of research. I've got a couple of questions here for you that I'd
Yep.
like you to kind of help me out. I want to be ready when I go, that I know exactly what I'm doing. So two questions. The first is Americans, we like our food at our sporting events. So I asked this, what is the go-to food at the footy for you?
For me personally,
Yep.
um, that's a very good question. Because I'm involved in this coterie group, which, if you know, is like a group of supporters of a
Hmm.
particular club that just put in a bit of extra money, and we have a halftime function at every home game. Um, so that's not traditional football food.
Hmm.
We try to make it a bit more upmarket, as distinct from your normal footy food, which are pies, hot dogs, salad rolls, chips, dim sims,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. Though I must admit, I was rather partial to the hot dogs we used to have at our home games.
Hmm.
Yeah, in years gone by, they were rather good. But I just have a bite to eat at our half time function. So it's not really traditional footy food, but I imagine you can get much the same sort of thing here as what you get in the States.
Yeah, it's never great for you, but it's always really good. It just depends on where you
Well,
go
on a
to. I
cold,
mean,
on a cold day, a hot dog or a pie goes pretty well.
or a nice bucket of hot chips.
Yep.
The pie and the hot chips are the two most popular ones. I was waiting. Nobody had said the hot jam donuts, and I'd heard the hot jam donuts outside the MCG were really really good. So I actually had
Ah,
somebody say that one time. You got to try those. So
yes.
I've heard that one for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. When I used to go and watch Fitzroy, they had. This is when they played at Princes Park, Carlton's
Mhm.
home ground. They used to have donuts there. I remember. I never ate them because they smell terrible to me, but they were pretty popular.
To each their own. To each their own. And
Yeah,
then the
like
ultimate.
jam and sugar.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
All right. And the ultimate question again, when you go to the footy, you got to have the best seat. I want to get a really good seat to be able to watch the footy, whether it's at a local ground or at a big AFL ground. Where is your ideal place to sit when you go to watch the footy?
Oh, I don't. I can't sit down and watch football. It drives me insane.
Hmm.
I got to stand up. I mean, if you go to an AFL game, you do have to sit down, and you don't get a choice of seats. You get a ticket and that's your seat. Um, but at my home ground, I always stand in front of the grandstand because they have a bar there. You can get a cold can and watch the footy from about the half forward flank area. So that's where I stand. Yep. I never sit down at Williamstown games. Never.
Too nervous, or just you just have to
Yeah, no,
be standing up?
I can't. I feel uncomfortable sitting down at the football. I just
Mhm.
don't like it. Just don't like. Never have. Never will. I got to stand up.
You're not the first person to say that. I know one person I was talking to that they said they're a pacer, that they have to pace back and forth because it helps calm their nerves a little bit. So that is
Yeah.
not the first time I have heard that particular one. So all right. And
Yeah.
the last question that I have, and I kind of teased this a little bit earlier, and I love this one. Like I said, I am starting a list because I've been told these are some of the best games to watch. Favorite game of footy you have ever seen live, on the telly, at the ground, doesn't matter. What is your favorite game of footy you have ever seen?
Oh, the one I mentioned before, the 1990 VFA Grand Final, Williamstown v Springvale. Won't see anything better.
Fantastic. Absolutely love it. I will definitely try and make I
Yeah.
would definitely try and make sure and catch that for sure. I got a list going. I will definitely put that down and have a look at that when I have a chance on my YouTube watchings which are usually, especially come the footy season, pretty high. So, well,
Yep.
Gerry, that is going to do it for the questions that I have for you. It's a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
It is just awesome to be able to sit here and have a chat with somebody that has, as you said, a story of a club. I've never had that opportunity, so this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Welcome, Donnie. A pleasure to speak to you. And if you want to learn more about Williamstown, get on our website and have a look at the history pages. Got some great stuff on there. Great photos, great stories.
I will definitely do that for sure. I've loved some of the stories and some of the information that I've gotten from many of these chats. I absolutely love it. I'm finding myself intrigued more and more by many of these state sides, and it's so fantastic to be able to be welcomed so kindly for it. So I appreciate it. So, ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
that is going to do it for our episode today. Again, we are getting closer and closer to the AFL season, and we will be doing previews and getting ready for the footy to get started. But as I told you in a couple of episodes previously, I will be trying to at least do at least once a month round reviews, or at least month reviews of VFL, Sandful, and Waffle. I want to be able to give the state sides some love and support to be able to talk about that, because I love footy so much. I think this is a passion project that I really want to do. So keep an eye out. We're going to try to do that as well. That's going to do it for our episode. We'll be back again.